Hi, this is Catherine with BoardGameGeek. I'm joined here by Sarah from Renegade Game Studios, and she's here to talk about Viscounts of the West Kingdom. So, Sarah, please tell me about the game. This is the newest in the series, right?
Yes, so Viscounts of the West Kingdom is the third in the West Kingdom series. So we started out with Architects of the West Kingdom, and then then Paladins of the West Kingdom, and now we've got Viscounts of the West Kingdom coming out in October. So in this game, similar to all of the other ones in the series, you're gonna be able to jump in really quickly because a lot of the symbols are shared. So if you've played those other games in this series, which I really hope you do, you're gonna recognize a lot of the same mechanics and symbols, but with an entirely new gameplay, totally fresh look at this. So the first thing you're going to notice is this really cool shaped board. So it's almost a circle here in the middle. And during the game, you're going to be moving your Viscount around that board and choosing different various places to be on it. And each turn, you essentially have two different choices. You can either be on the inside of that board, which allows you to take one of two different actions, or on the outside of the board, which allows you to take two different actions. So it's pretty simple. Every turn, you're really just deciding what of those two actions are you going to, or what of those two areas are going to be in, and then which of the two actions are you going to choose. So that all starts at the beginning of your turn on your own player board. And the first thing you're going to do is be playing a card out onto the player board that will give you a couple of symbols that you can work with that gives you bonuses to whatever action you do end up choosing. So you'll have no cards to start out the game, a few little symbols that start on your board. And as you go through the game, we get to see it a little bit closer. Nice. As you go through the game, you're going to shift those cards from the left side of your board to the right side. So during most of the game, you're going to have 3 cards on there that give you symbols that will add to the actions that you're taking. So for example, we can see on this one, we've actually got 3 inkwells, which is the number underneath the silver symbol in the top left, which will help us do one of those actions. So if you're on the inside of the board and you take that action, which is the transcription action, then you would need to meet a certain minimum number to be able to do it in that area, which will allow you to collect a resource, a little like bonus thing that helps you at the end of the game. Okay, that sounded a little confusing, but it all actually ends up being pretty straightforward. You play a card, move some cards down, and then your Viscount is going to get to take an action. All pretty straightforward, but of course, there's a lot of different ways you can win. So we'll talk about a few of those really quickly. You have on the outside of the board, you can either be trading, which helps you get more resources, or you can be building. Building is super important in this game because as you take buildings off of your board, they give you game long bonuses that help you sort of a little bit of engine building, helps you do better in the rest of the game, makes actions easier. So those two different things, helping you get resources, building buildings, getting some little bonuses, super, super important. On the inside of the board are a little bit more end game actions. So one of those actions is, I already talked about the transcription action, which allows you, if you have the minimum requirement, to take these little bonus tokens. And there's a little bit of set collection there. If you get enough of the right bonus tokens, then there's an added benefit that you get from those. Pretty straightforward. The last action you can do is actually hiring workers that go into that middle castle you see in the center of the board. And they'll bump each other in this sort of combo-y way to get up to the next levels as you have a certain number at each level. So as you move them up, you get bonuses. At the end of the game, you're going to get points depending on how many workers you have at each level of that castle. And so that's the main way the game works. All the time that you're doing this, there's sort of an underlying good or evil that's happening. And on your own individual player board, there's this track that you'll see that as you take some certain actions, it'll move a white marker and a black marker closer together. Moving the white marker to the left is a good thing, and moving the black marker to the right is kind of usually a bad thing. When they collide, this cool thing happens. You'll get some either debt cards or maybe deed cards. They'll give you points at the end of the game, or the debt cards give you negative points at the end of the game. And then it also gives everyone else playing a little bit of an action. So you have to be managing all of these different actions that you're taking during the game to make sure that your good or evil track is going the way you want it to be. One of the other ways you score at the end of the game is using these debt and deed cards. The way the game ends is when one of those two piles runs out. Whenever the deed pile, which are the red ones, runs out, anyone who has successfully flipped over the most debt cards will get a whole bunch of points. And that also is true in reverse. So you need to be managing, do I want to get a whole bunch of deed cards and maybe end the game early? But that means that whoever has the most debt cards flipped over is going to get a bunch of points. So it's this huge balancing act between the good and evil and the debt and deeds. So there's a lot going on. But just like with any of the games in this series, there's so many things to think about. There's lots of different ways you can play, lots of things you can be working towards, and many different paths to victory. But it's all very simple once you start playing. Yes, there's a lot to think about, but the actions themselves are very easy. You simply move some cards down, play a card, move your Viscount, and then take the one action you've picked. There's not a whole lot else to think about during your turn. You just want to be thinking 3 or 4 turns ahead. So yeah, that's pretty much the gist of Viscounts.
Planning, 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 right?
Definitely. When we think about the whole series, I think about Architects as being this very interactive game. It's really silly. You're putting all of your opponent's workers in jail. It's still a worker placement game, but there are these hilarious things that happen during it, even though it looks like a pretty serious game. So lots of interaction, great for bigger groups, super, super fun, and a different look at worker placement. You look at Paladins, and this is a heads down engine building, almost solo experience where nobody messes with what I'm trying to do. And I'm just trying to do it better than anyone else sitting at the table. I love that experience because I don't like people picking on me. But then you look at Viscounts, and it's again a totally different worker placement type experience where you're still doing a little bit engine building, you're doing a little bit of set collection, but overall, this is a planning game. If you love planning a few steps ahead, this is the game for you.
Definitely. Now, how many players does this play? You mentioned solo. Is there a solo variant here?
Yeah, definitely. This goes 1 to 4 players. It does have solo components included in the game. Another really cool thing to remember about this is that because it's part of the West Kingdom series, it'll also be compatible with Tome Saga. So we have these 3 games in the series, and if you want to play all of them as a campaign game, then you can do that by adding the Tome Saga box, which comes out at the same time as Viscounts on October 21st. So that will allow you to play all 3 games in a row as a campaign, and you can play them cooperatively, which I really love the idea of that. I have a group that plays only cooperative campaign style games, so I can't wait to try that out. It's a really interesting idea, at least in Viscounts in particular. The cooperative version gives you this sort of evil character that's wandering around the board trying to mess with you. So the group is working together to try and bother him and get points, even though there's this big evil character stomping around. Sounds super fun. I will admit I haven't gotten a chance to try it yet, but I'm really looking forward to that one.
But just having that solo option and that cooperative option really gives a lot of variability to the game, right? And then the amount of choices you have really, I'm assuming, depending on which way you end up going, it's going to give a completely different gameplay experience.
Absolutely. I think there's some parts of the game that everybody should probably be participating in. You want to make sure you're doing some trading to get all the resources you need. Building buildings at the beginning of the game is super important so that you can make everything a little bit cheaper in the future. But whether you go for hiring workers and putting them in the castle, or you're going for the transcription route, or maybe you're just really focusing on those deeds and debts, which give you a lot of points at the end of the game, there are a lot of choices. So I do think you probably could play this game many times without even having the same experience. If you wanted to, you could go the same route every time and optimize it. I know some people like to do that. Or you can just try everything the game has to offer, which I think makes it a great experience.
We have a bit of time. Should we maybe try to go through just one round of play?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you could actually put up the player board with a couple different cards there on the bottom, we'll get that figured out. I really appreciate you guys handling all of the behind the scenes for us. Really helps. All right, so let's get some cards on there. So there is a little bit of a deck building aspect to this as well. So everybody starts out with a really basic deck with just a few of these symbols that are honestly kind of lame. They're not super powerful. And as you go through the game, you do have a chance to buy new cards that will add to this deck or destroy cards from your deck to really make it optimized, because there's a lot that goes on here. So the first thing you do is pick a card from your hand, and you're going to shift all of the cards to the right to make room for that new card. And the card that's already on the right farthest is going to fall off. And that particular one that just fell off, the thief, actually has an action. So you see at the bottom half of her card, there's an X. That means when she is removed from the board, you get one debt, which is the black plus card, and one silver. So she's going to do that when she falls off. So you would take those. Yep, there's a debt, which is -2 points at the end of the game. The reason she has that drawback is because while she's on your board, she counts as a wild symbol, which is really powerful. All right, so she's gone. We did our actions for her leaving. Now we get to choose a card from our hand. You generally have 3 cards in your hand, although that can go up or down depending on other things. So you put him out there. It's a little hard to see, but he's got a build action, and there we go. Yeah, it's got a little hammer. So he's got one build action, and that means that if you wanted to, you now have a build action. You have I believe that's a trade action on the second one, although I can't see it super well. Oh, what is that one? Yeah, that's a blue trade action. A little bit green screen problems going on, that's fine. So that's a blue trade action. And then on the far right, we have a higher action. So that means we could do any of those 3, but none of them are super powerful because we only have one symbol to add to our group of symbols per each one. So we played our card, great. Now we need to move our Viscount. You move your Viscount spaces equal to the number of the silver cost of the character you just put on your board. You don't actually pay for the character, it just tells you how far it's going to move. There are other cases in which you would purchase that character. So let's go ahead and move our Viscount. You start at a random place based on cards you draft at the beginning of the game. And so that the different action spaces have numbers on them. So we can just start him pretty much anywhere on the board. Doesn't matter a whole lot. So there we go. So we're starting on what ends up being the outside of the board. And in that space, we only have one legal direction we can go, but we can choose two movements. So you can't go towards the center of the board because you can't see, but there's an arrow that says that you can't go that direction. But we can go clockwise around the board to that next area. So let's go ahead and do that. So we move one space clockwise around the outside of the board. There we go. And now we have a choice because we have a second movement. We can either go towards the inside of the board, or we can go another space along the outside of the board. So just as an example, let's go inside. So we'll go towards the center of the board. All right, so because we're on the center of the board now, we only have 2 different actions that we can choose from. We can either hire workers, which puts them in the center of that castle, or we can purchase a transcription tile that's adjacent to us. So that transcription tile, if you could pick that up. Yeah, let's see what that one says. Check that out. So that says that we would need 3 of that transcription symbol to be able to purchase that card. It also has a color, I believe that's gray. There's 4 different colors, and if you have one of each of those different colors, you'll get a whole bunch of points at the end of the game. Also, it says when you purchase it, you will be able to move your marker 1 space in that good and evil track. So they each kind of give you a little one-time bonus, but they are kind of hard to buy unless you have enough of those symbols. So looking back at our board, let's see how many of that particular symbol we have. All right, so it looks like we actually don't have any of that symbol. We can always buy symbols using different resources. So if we wanted to buy the transcription symbol, we would have to use inkwells, which are the little black ones. We probably don't have that resource. So instead, maybe we use something that we do have enough resources for. For example, if we had maybe a couple of the gold, we use gold to hire workers. So we can hire some of them and place them. Let's say we had 3 gold. 3 gold, we've got 1 symbol on our board that gives us 4, not quite enough to hire 3 workers, but we could hire 2. We would have to spend a couple of our gold to do that, and then we would put 2 workers on the first layer of that castle, right next to where we're at. All right, so we've got a couple workers there. If we had 3 workers, it would bump one of them up to the next level. If there were more than 3 total workers there of any color, then it would have to go down to 3 and we decide whose worker gets bumped. Whoever gets bumped gets a little bonus, whoever stays there gets points at the end of the game. So we would have to make that decision. So one thing we didn't do, I kind of forgot about this optional step, is that we could also have removed the card that's on the space where we're at to get an extra symbol if it matches the symbol of the action we're trying to do this turn. So let's look at that card really quick. All right, it is a builder and trader action card. So because we were doing the hire workers action, we could not have removed that card from play. But if we had been doing one of those actions, we could have paid a small cost and removed it. However, hey, oh, that still looks like a builder card. All right, so, but at the end of our turn, we could choose to just buy that card and put it in our deck if we want to. And the card has a silver cost on the upper left-hand corner of the card. And if we buy it, then it immediately goes into our discard deck. Also, when we buy it, we would get the symbol on the upper right-hand side of that card. Similar to a lot of other games in the West Kingdom series, these cards do a lot of different things depending on how you choose to interact with them. We already know that it will depend, how much you move depends on the card that you play during that turn. The symbols on the card, once it's in play on your board, will allow you to do actions more or less powerfully. And the symbols in the upper right hand of the card will allow you to do things if you purchase the card and put it in your discard, which will eventually get shuffled back in and then put into your hand, which you can then play. And the bottom part of the card deals with what happens when you actually play the card. You'll get minor bonuses either immediately, during the time that's on the board, or when it gets discarded off of the board. So each of these cards do a ton of different things, just like all of the games in the Garfield series. So lots of cool stuff going on. And that would be almost the end of your turn. You would just draw back up to 3 cards and then that's it. So yes, that seemed like a lot of little minor things, but they all make sense and flow once you've done it a few different times. Like I said before, you're choosing, do you want to be on the outside of the board or do you want to be on the inside of the board? Are you trying to do actions that get you resources and build up your team, or are you trying to do actions that get you points at the end of the game? Are you worried about taking deeds or debts or moving your good or evil track? Or are you more concerned about buying cards to add to your deck to make the actions you want to do a little bit more powerful, a little bit easier to do in the future? So lots of really good choices here.
Are there any plans for expansions for this as well, or?
We do not have confirmed plans for an expansion for this. Like I mentioned before, we do have the Tome Saga, which actually I'll show you that right here. So the West Kingdom Tome Saga, this is coming out on October 21st, just like Viscounts of the West Kingdom is. And this will add a bunch of different components for architects, paladins, and viscounts, and allow you to play them cooperatively and as a campaign. So lots of good stuff going on in that box. Definitely want that. If you've got the whole series already, please add that. It just makes it even better.
And you said October 21st. Does that mean you can get a hold of it during the Spiel online?
You will be able to order it from renegadegames.com during that convention. So yeah, definitely
Fantastic.
order it. You can even pre-order it right now and have it to play during Essen if you want to get, your friends in your bubble that you've carefully vetted and are safe to come over and play with you, or good family members. If you're looking for 2-player games in particular, I know a lot of people are kind of trying to stay safe, playing smaller player counts. I played Viscounts with just my husband last night and we had a great time. I don't see any reason why you couldn't play this with just 2 people and have a wonderful experience. Paladins also is just fantastic at only 2 players. It really doesn't matter if you're playing 1, 2, 4 players. It works the same way. So yeah, definitely try those out. Pre-order now. We'll ship it ahead of time so that you have it by release date and make sure that it's on your table so you can play it during Essen.
Fantastic. Any last little details you want to add before we wrap up?
Another thing that people may or may not have heard about, if you love the West Kingdom series, if you love Raiders of the North Sea, which was a Kenner Spiel nominee a couple of years ago, make sure to try out Raiders of Scythia. So Raiders of Scythia is a new game coming out beginning of October in the North series kind of setting, but with brand new artwork and some new fundamental changes to the game. So it's going to play a lot like Raiders of the North Sea, but there's horses and eagles that are added to the game. The artwork's different. It's actually set in more of an Eastern European setting. So it's got this brand new beautiful artwork. And the new components that it adds, the new mechanical changes that you get from it, feels like you've added an expansion to Raiders of the North Sea, but it's all nicely contained in one little box. So especially if you have people who are kind of wavering, like, do we want to get a whole bunch of expansions for Raiders? Do we just want to keep playing Raiders, go on to other things? I would try out Raiders of Scythia because it is very similar to Raiders of the North Sea, but adds all these extra little things that just make it great.
Fantastic. We'll definitely keep our eyes out for that. Well, thank you so much. There was one comment from the chat about this lovely round board. It seems to be a bit of a fad with these alternative board shapes. Is any plans of going back to square boards at all, or is it the future of the boards?
I think you'll see when you play this one, there's a really good mechanic reason why it's shaped the way that it is. And the other nice thing about it is that it's not difficult to put together. It's a whole bunch of triangles that you just squish together, and then the plastic piece in the middle that makes up the castle holds them all together really nicely. So we don't plan on ever releasing a square board for this one simply because it wouldn't make any sense. And I think it's beautiful this way. I really like it. It does stand out on a table.
I completely agree. Definitely. And, it has that flow to it, right? Because that's what you're doing. You're traveling around in a circle, right? So when the board calls for it.
Of that, yeah, and I think it really does help you wrap your head around the game, the way the game works, because this game is all about thinking about where everything will be in 1, 2, or 3 turns from now. And that big circle reminds you my Viscount is going to be in a different clockwise position than it is now. So I need to think ahead. Where are my options for where that goes? And how is that going to be affected by the cards that I have on my board and how they're constantly shifting as well? Because those cards are going to fall off. Then I get to the action I wanted to do and I don't have the symbols I need. So I need to plan for that. So if it were on a square, I feel like it would make that game harder to wrap your head around. This circle really does remind you this is a continual pattern that we're going through, and we need to think about that ahead of time.
Definitely. And it's just finding that right shape for the right game, right? And this is definitely the shape that works for this game. Thank you so much.